I'm Sam Ebersole, Director of Training for Global News Alliance. My goal is to help prepare and equip people like you to tell your stories about what God is doing. And then we'll help you share those stories with a global audience. Today we're going to focus on how you can use your mobile phone to help advance the kingdom of God. And I know that's a big statement, but in the next 20 to 30 minutes, I want to give you a vision for how you can greatly extend your ability to share your God stories with an even larger audience than you're currently reaching. Let's begin by considering the power of stories. Take a moment to reflect on beliefs and where those beliefs come from. What do you believe about yourself, about your local community, about the world, and about God? And where do those beliefs come from? I think if we're honest, we're going to realize that our beliefs come from stories that we've been told. Stories come in many forms and many formats. A song, a movie, a book, YouTube videos, even memes on social media. All of these are forms of stories that shape our view of reality. Some might call it our worldview. Now, what we believe about God should come from Him, from stories from the Bible, from the revelation of His Son Jesus Christ, and from the Holy Spirit that He's given to live in us. And all of these should be experienced within a community of fellow believers. But what we believe about the world, about those around us, and even about ourselves, unfortunately, too often comes from stories told by secular media. Those stories may entertain, but they don't give life. In contrast, we've been entrusted with the greatest story ever told, the story of the gospel. Now, it's been said that sharing the gospel is as simple as one beggar telling another beggar where he found bread. So today we're going to talk about sharing the gospel through storytelling in the form of news, or journalism as it's also known. And we're going to show you some techniques to be more effective storytellers using the tool that you have in your hand, your mobile phone. Now, I'm sure you remember the story of Moses, specifically when Moses was questioning his ability to complete the assignment that God had given him. And God said to Moses, "Moses, what's in your hand?" And he looked, and it was a staff, just an ordinary stick. Well, if I ask you today, what's in your hand, it may well be your smartphone. And if it's not in your hand, it's probably in your purse or your pocket or somewhere nearby. We're pretty much tethered to our mobile phones, which is a blessing and a curse. Today, I'd like to focus on the blessing part, and that is the amazing potential that we have with these devices. So what's in your hand is what we want to focus on, and how your phone can be a tool that can help you effectively reach your community and the world with the gospel of Christ. In just the last few years, the mobile phone has become an incredibly powerful tool to enable digital storytelling. Today's average smartphone has enormous computing power, and with an internet connection, this device allows the user to research, write, record, edit, and publish digital media to a global audience. Think about that for a moment. The industry of content creation and distribution is experiencing the greatest revolution in the history of our business. 20 years ago, the cost and limited availability of the technology required to do what your smartphone can do today meant that it was out of reach for all but major broadcasters with big bank accounts. That's amazing. That's powerful. And that's what Global News Alliance is all about. We're about building a network of citizen journalists who are prepared and able to take their smartphone into the field and record stories about what God is doing, what's happening in His church, what's happening in your particular region, in your particular country, in your particular cultural context, and then to share that with a global audience. Because if there's one thing that unites us all, it's that shared commitment to transmitting the gospel of Christ to a world that desperately needs to hear the good news. But before I leave this topic of storytelling, I want to focus on just a couple of more points. One is that technology changes, but storytelling never will. Mike Castellucci is a smartphone journalism instructor, and he makes an important point. This is just the most current technology for helping us tell the story that remains the same. We can't count on the secular media to tell our stories. If they try, they won't get it right. So we've got to do it. And another point is that we need to know and understand our audience. We need to speak their language, literally and figuratively, and speak to universal themes that cut across every culture. Our stories need to appeal to basic human emotions and establish characters that are relatable and likable. One of my favorite journalist storytellers is Steve Hartman with CBS News. I'm not even sure he's a believer, but he understands human emotion and how to connect with an audience in a 2 to 3 minute news feature. The common feature of every story that he reports is Steve's ability to explore the human emotion at the center of each story. So by now you might be thinking, okay, I know of stories about what God is doing in my town or community, but I don't have a professional camera crew to follow me around. Exactly. But let me give you a few tips on how you can use your mobile phone to produce video news stories that can have the same impact as those produced with big budgets and top-of-the-line video technology. Because the secret is not in the tools, it's in the hands and creativity of the artist. Now let's get into some of the practical considerations. This is a card that my friend Stan Jeter put together a couple of years ago, and there's a PDF that you can download from the GNA website. It has 2 sides, and I'm going to go over these tips point by point to get us thinking about some of the important things that we need to consider as smartphone journalists. So I'm going to start with the left side, which is on your screen. It's labeled 5 storytelling tips. But above that is a statement in red that says your story has only 3 seconds to grab the viewer's attention. To stop a potential viewer from scrolling past your video or changing the channel, you need to start with a powerful visual and a strong audio clip. You have only a short time to capture their attention before they make a decision to stay and watch or keep moving on. Below that is the first of 5 storytelling tips. Get the facts: who, what, when, where, and why. The next tip is to use strong images. Grab their attention with strong images and don't let it go. So strong and compelling images are going to draw the viewer in. Third is to use simple words, common language, short words, active verbs. Scripted narration should be complementary, not redundant to what we're seeing. Next is to use emotion. Is there a reason for your viewing audience to care? This is where you're tapping into those things that make us human, those deep emotional connections between humans. And last, be brief and concise. For news, 1.5 to 3.5 minutes. For social media, no more than 2 minutes, typically. On the other side of the card has several tips for pre-production, things to do before you start to record audio and video. So before you actually get your smartphone out of your pocket and start recording, you may need to do a bit of research. Who are the key players? What is the story? Who can I interview who has first-hand knowledge? What's the most compelling part of this that can be told as a news story? You might create a shot list, a list of shots that you might need to record before you leave that location. Next, a couple of tips that are simple but often overlooked. Make sure that the lens of your phone is clean. Use a small piece of clean cloth to clean it off before you start shooting. Make sure that you've got a fully charged battery and that you have sufficient memory storage. Audio and video files tend to be quite large and tend to take up a lot of space. And then below that are 10 production tips. I'm going to go through them one at a time. And again, some of them are pretty simple and basic. Others you might not have heard of before. The first one is to activate airplane mode. And what that will do is prevent your phone from sending you notifications or taking calls, anything that might interrupt the recording that you're making. So activate airplane mode. Next, hold the phone horizontally. The phone should be horizontal and you're shooting in a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now, some social media platforms are exceptions to this. For example, TikTok, where videos are vertical. I think it's pretty much the same for Snapchat and a few other social media platforms as well. Instagram videos, I'm pretty sure, are square formatted. But for our purposes, for YouTube and for GNA, we're going to be using traditional high definition television formatting, which is horizontal 16 by 9. The next item is about the lighting. Make sure that the strong light is behind you, behind the camera, not behind the subject. When the subject is standing in front of the light source, it tends to underexpose the subject and the background is blown out or too bright. So make sure that the light source is behind you, bouncing off of the subject before coming into the lens of your smartphone. Next is audio. And although the microphones built into your smartphone are pretty good, it's going to be much better to use an external microphone especially for interviews. I'm wearing a lapel microphone to record this video, for instance. So having a clip-on microphone that can be attached to your phone with a cord, or there are wireless options as well, will greatly enhance the audio quality. If you don't have an external microphone, then have the phone close to the subject in an interview setting. No more than a meter would be recommended so that you can pick up clean audio. Of course, the other part of that is be in a location that doesn't have loud background audio. So a busy street or a blaring sound system or music is really a really terrible background for an interview. So you want to make sure that the background audio is not overpowering the audio that you're trying to record. The next item on the list is to stabilize your phone. So what do we mean by stabilization? We're talking about holding it steady so that it's not bouncing around and moving. Now, for B-roll, handheld shots with built-in digital image stabilization can be pretty good. But for interviews, I would highly recommend the use of a tripod. And there are lots of options out there, fairly inexpensive, short tripods, taller tripods. As you can see from this image, this is an interview setting where the gentleman in the sweater is conducting the interview. He's standing right next to his smartphone, which is mounted on top of a tripod. The lens on the smartphone is at eye level with the subject who's being interviewed, and it's stationary because it's on a tripod. So that's much better than trying to hold it while you're asking questions and you're probably not holding it very steady. So there are, as I mentioned, other techniques. There are even gimbals for smartphones, but without spending much money at all, you can buy an inexpensive tripod and the bracket that holds the phone, and that will provide a much more stable shot, which will make your interview shots much more pleasing. The next item is to frame the shot, and that is, think about the composition within the frame. So the frame is the outside edge of the shot that you're shooting. And one thing that we often recommend is to pay attention to the rule of thirds. That is, divide the frame into 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines so that you have the intersection of lines dividing the frame up into the area that's most interesting. Dead center, except for a video like this where you're speaking to camera, but dead center is generally visually boring. So you tend to want to put the focal point of the shot where those lines intersect using the rule of thirds. The other thing to keep in mind is for interviews, always shoot interviews at eye level. That is, the lens of the smartphone shouldn't be higher or lower than the eye line of the subject being interviewed. Most smartphone camera apps allow you to operate in full automatic mode, but some allow you to also adjust and go into manual mode. Automatic is great if you're just starting out. It does a pretty good job of autofocus, auto white balance, and auto exposure. But once you learn to master those, it's good to use manual mode or to tap and hold the screen to lock the exposure, the focus, the white balance at the current setting for the duration of the shot. And we can get into that in more detail if we do some training later on. But shooting in automatic mode is fine most of the time, but there are times when it will be vastly better to use manual exposure, manual focus, manual white balance. The next item is to record a minimum of 10 seconds per shot when you're shooting B-roll. And B-roll, by the way, are all those visual shots that you get that are not either interview sound bites or stand-up reporter bits where the person is speaking to the camera, either in an interview setting or the reporter. So B-roll are those visuals that help support the narrative that is made up of sound bites and narration. So 10 seconds per minimum shot for your B-roll shots is a good rule of thumb. Next is, and this is very important, if your camera, your smartphone has multiple lenses, it will have a normal lens and then either a wide angle lens or a telephoto lens, or maybe if you have one of the latest ones, it'll even have 3 lenses, normal, wide angle, and telephoto. But, and that's why this item 9 says zoom with your feet. Don't use the different lenses, or don't pinch and drag the screen to zoom in or zoom out. Using either lens other than the normal lens or the medium lens is going to be less quality than the normal lens. So always use the normal lens, and then instead of pinching or spreading your fingers to zoom the picture in and out, move closer when you want a more detailed shot and move further away when you want a wider shot. So zoom with your feet, meaning just move your camera physically closer or physically further away from the subject to change your framing. And then that leads to the last point, is shoot a variety of shots. Wide shots, medium shots, and detail shots, WMDs, okay? So another word for the detail shot is a close-up, so wide, medium, and close-up. But use a variety of shots to tell the stories. And think in series of shots to show and maintain continuity while letting the viewer know what's the most important thing to focus on. So a wide shot gives you the context, medium shot gives you a little bit more detail, and then the tight shot is what gives you the most detail and is the most intriguing or possibly the most emotional shot, are those close-up shots. One last item before I leave is, if your camera, your smartphone, is capable of shooting above high definition, that is 4K, there might be times when it's worth to shoot 4K, but most of the time I would recommend shooting and editing and submitting your finished piece to GNA in full HD, which is 1080. 1080 is the number of lines of resolution. I don't want to get too detailed in the technical side of it, but HD is high quality. 4K, as the name suggests, is close to 4,000 lines of resolution. It's 3840 lines of resolution. So it's higher resolution, but those files are larger and a little bit more difficult to edit. So I would recommend shooting and editing and delivering in full high definition, that is 1080. So please check out our website, gna.news, and please contact me, sebersole@gna.news, if you have any questions or want more information about future opportunities for training. God bless you.